Hello everyone, welcome back to the summary series That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime on AniMonolith. Continuing the events of the previous part, Ruberius is still not stable. The various duels were unfolding in a carefully orchestrated fashion. Granbell clashed with Hinata, Shion and Ranga struggled against Razul, and Diablo had seemingly triumphed over the primordial blue. Outside the tomb, Laplace and Maria had already battled against Luminous' forces, and the Holy Ark had been stolen. Meanwhile, Remuru was still dealing with the mindless Otherworlders who fought like zombies, devoid of any rational thought. Though the battle itself was not dangerous for him, restraining them without killing them proved to be a tedious task. With the combination of absolute defense and infinite regeneration, Remuru had no trouble neutralizing them one by one, eventually rendering them all unconscious. However, through his observation, he and Raphael realized that none of these summoned individuals had used their unique skills. That could only mean one thing: Granbell had orchestrated this merely to stall Remuru. Understanding this, Remuru quickly finished the fight and turned his attention back to the battlefield. The children remained safe, and the orchestra continued their performance, seemingly unbothered by the chaos around them. Remuru then observed Hinata's duel against Granbell. Their battle was fierce, both combatants exchanging strikes at unimaginable speeds. A single mistake could result in instant defeat, and Remuru knew better than to interfere in such a delicate clash. Shion and Ranga, on the other hand, were struggling against Razul. Despite their efforts, Razul's insect-like physiology granted him overwhelming advantages. His compound eyes allowed him to perceive every attack, making it difficult for Ranga's surprise strikes to land. Additionally, his exoskeleton was more resilient than steel, effortlessly deflecting magic and even withstanding the force of Shion's Odachi. It was becoming clear why Diablo had difficulty dealing with him. Razul was the natural counter to magic users. Nonetheless, Remuru remained confident that Diablo, given enough time, would find a way to overcome him. However, just as Remuru was considering intervening, an unexpected presence caught his attention. Demon Lord Leon Cromwell had arrived. Draped in golden armor and an immaculate knight's uniform, Leon's striking appearance was enough to momentarily distract even Remuru. The sheer perfection of his looks, his noble bearing. However, something was off. He seemed to be in a terribly foul mood, and his presence here was perplexing. Why had he come? Was he an ally or an enemy? Before Remuru could process the situation, Granbell addressed him directly. "You've arrived, Demon Lord Leon. And Hinata, it seems you still have enough focus to be distracted from our fight." Hinata had also noticed Leon's presence, momentarily shifting her attention from Granbell. The way Granbell spoke made it clear he was attempting to manipulate the situation, possibly to drive a wedge between Remuru and Leon. Leon, however, was not so easily fooled, but Granbell persisted. He spoke of how he had used Leon's summoning method to bring forth the otherworldly children and then sold them to him. He insinuated that Leon had come today to collect the final shipment, the 5 children under Rimuru's care. This was yet another of Granbell's carefully calculated manipulations, aimed at provoking Rimuru's sense of justice. For a moment, Remuru was stunned. If what Granbell said was true, then Leon was directly responsible for the suffering of numerous children, including Shizu. His past actions of summoning and abandoning them, of using them as pawns, it was infuriating. Though Raphael had already warned Remuru that Granbell was using rhetoric to turn him against Leon, the emotions were difficult to suppress. Seeing Leon remain silent, neither confirming nor denying the accusations, only fueled Rimuru's rage. And so, without another word, Remuru acted on instinct. He charged at Leon and delivered a full force punch to his face. Leon did not resist. He made no move to dodge, nor did his knights interfere. Rimuru's fist connected solidly, sending a resounding crack through the air. Leon took the full punch, but it didn't affect his face too much. Only the lips that Guy desired were crushed and bleeding. Leon barely reacted. He wiped the blood away with a handkerchief and calmly asked, "Are you satisfied now?" In that moment, Remuru understood. Despite Leon's cold demeanor, he was not as heartless as he seemed. If he were truly cruel, he would have struck back. Instead, he had accepted the punch without retaliation. Shizu, even in her final moments, had never truly hated Leon. She had only wanted to understand him. That was her final wish, and Remuru had now fulfilled it in the most direct way possible. Still, the matter was far from resolved. Remuru met Leon's gaze and declared, "That was for Shizu, but my grudge against you isn't over yet." Leon understood immediately. Remuru was not acting purely on emotion. He was testing him. And he had passed. Granbell's manipulations had failed. Remuru wasn't blinded by anger. He was thinking ahead, trying to discern how to handle the situation. A smirk crossed Leon's face as he drew his sword. "I see. So that's your answer." As he took his stance, he surveyed the battlefield. The chaos was far greater than he had expected. Normally, in a place like this, no one would care about some random guy dying. However, Luminous was different. Leon was an uninvited guest. If he caused too much trouble here, Luminous would undoubtedly retaliate. Hold the line, Leon commanded his knights. Minimize casualties. Do not kill anyone unnecessarily. As he considered Luminous's absence, he couldn't help but wonder, why had she yet to appear? With all this destruction occurring in her domain, her inaction was unusual. Was she being held up elsewhere? Leon's thoughts were cut short as Remuru subtly gestured towards Granbell. The message was clear. Leon smirked again. So that's how it is. Remuru had already figured out the real enemy. For the first time in a long while, Leon chose to trust someone else. And so he turned his gaze toward Granbell, preparing to face the true threat. Leon was not the only one struggling to process the rapidly shifting battlefield. On the other side, Hinata was also grappling with unexpected developments, particularly the overwhelming strength that Granbell was displaying. Are you wondering why you can't steal any of my techniques? Granbell's voice dripped with amusement. Hinata's eyes narrowed. She had been careful to keep her abilities hidden, yet somehow this man had seen right through her. In truth, Granbell was only making an educated guess, baiting Hinata into revealing the truth. Decades ago, when she had challenged the Seven Luminaries, Granbell had been the final and strongest opponent. He had studied her closely and drawn his own conclusions. He suspected that Hinata could not steal skills from the same opponent twice. If that were true, then it meant she had already attempted to steal from him in the past. Hinata remained expressionless, but responded dismissively. Is that so? That's how it works? Who knows? However, Hinata realized in a flash that she had been distracted. Granbell's smirk deepened. Now he was sure Hinata's ability, Usurper, was ineffective in this battle. He was proving to be an infuriatingly perceptive opponent, calm, experienced, and utterly arrogant. For those who may have forgotten, Hinata possessed the unique skill, Usurper, allowing her to steal or copy her opponent's abilities. Against stronger enemies, the skill would analyze the target and determine whether it could be stolen. If the attempt failed, she could try again repeatedly until she succeeded. However, against weaker opponents, the result would always be not applicable. In the past, when she had first used Usurper on Granbell, the result had been not applicable, meaning she was stronger than him at the time. But as she continued analyzing him during training sessions, the outcome eventually changed. Hinata was able to copy his skill, but not outright steal it. Now history was repeating itself. Her ability was again returning a result of not applicable. However, Hinata had a trump card, Forced Usurpation, which allowed her to steal a skill completely, regardless of restrictions. Confident in her advantage, she activated it. The result shocked her. She successfully stole Granbell's skill, only for him to immediately replace it with another one. No matter how many times she repeated the process, he always had another skill ready to take its place. Was he creating duplicates of his abilities and swapping them out as soon as they were taken? As a former hero, Granbell was certainly capable of such a feat. What's wrong, Hinata? You don't look so good. His mocking tone only fueled her frustration. This man talks too much. Granbell believed Hinata lacked real combat experience. He pointed out that while she was skilled at stealing techniques from stronger opponents, she rarely did so against weaker ones. And now her so-called trump card was draining too much of her stamina. Hinata was stunned. He had figured out everything. She had once looked down on Granbell, but now she regretted underestimating him. She leaped back, putting distance between them. Cursing under her breath, she admitted that Forced Usurpation was useless in this fight. However, something else was wrong. Her heart was pounding at an alarming rate. Sweat dripped from her forehead and a dull pain radiated from her chest. This wasn't just exhaustion from overusing her skill. Something was actively draining her stamina. Granbell, ever so smug, offered an explanation. I've been carefully orchestrating my movements to exhaust you little by little. Each attack forced you to exert just a bit more energy than necessary, gradually wearing you down. Against an opponent on your level, stamina is the key to victory. The moment your judgment wavers, you'll make a fatal mistake. Hinata gritted her teeth. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. She had believed herself to be calculating and strategic, yet Granbell had outplayed her at every turn. He had what she lacked. Decades, perhaps centuries, of real combat experience. Skills could be stolen. Experience could not. Hinata clenched her sword tighter. I see, that means I'll have to fight with everything I've got. Granbell's smirk widened. Correct. Now come, show me your true power, if you can. The battlefield fell into an eerie silence. The world seemed to fade away, leaving only Hinata and Granbell, locked in a deadly stare. Then, they charged at each other. Meanwhile, Diablo's battle was reaching its climax. His multi-stage disintegration spell had shattered Rain's defenses, and the final beam of light pierced through her chest. Kufu-fufu. Pathetic. Fighting you is even more boring than Testarossa before her evolution. Rain's eyes flickered with confusion. Testarossa? That's none of your concern, Diablo replied coolly. What matters is why you're here. Rain's lips curled into a weak smile. Do you think I'll just tell you? Diablo's eyes narrowed. He had anticipated that response. Still, something felt off. For a moment, time seemed to slow. He was caught in an internal conflict. On one hand, Razul, the fully evolved Insectar, was a serious threat. His kind thrived in the gaps between the physical and spiritual worlds. Essentially, it was extremely rare for these monsters to evolve into humanoid forms. They usually couldn't adapt to the physical world and would be stuck at a certain level of evolution. Yet that insect-type monster called Razul somehow evolved into its final form. Diablo thought that even Xion and Ranga combined would have trouble dealing with it. As a demon peer, Diablo was one of the few who could reliably exterminate him. On the other hand, Rimuru-sama may have assigned Xion and Ranga to this fight for a reason. Perhaps he wanted them to gain experience. If Diablo interfered, would Rimuru-sama be disappointed? The mere thought sent shivers down his spine. For Diablo, letting down Rimuru was a fate worse than death. He ultimately decided to stay. Of course, he was completely wrong. Rimuru had no such intentions. He simply wanted the battle to end quickly and ensure the safety of the children and the orchestra. Diablo had overcomplicated things in his devotion. Still, Diablo's decision led to an unexpected encounter. It's over, he said to Rain. Her expression shifted from pale despair to bitter resentment. She had miscalculated. Diablo had seen through her from the beginning. Noir, you've only recently evolved into a demon peer. You still don't understand, do you? Diablo's tone was laced with amusement. Magicule quantity isn't everything. True strength comes from skill, experience, and strategy. Before Rain could respond, her body crumbled into ash. And then, a pillar of light shot through the sky. As the light faded, two figures emerged. One was Rain, the other was the strongest primordial demon, Guy Crimson. Long time no see, Noir, Guy greeted casually. Rouge. No, I suppose you go by Guy Crimson now. Diablo immediately tensed. In contrast to Diablo, Guy seemed to be reminiscing about old memories with his old friend. You've realized from the start that it was just Rain's mist, haven't you? Diablo frowned in disgust at the question. In fact, he wanted to deceive Rain and Guy to hide his true strength. If he had been a little more serious when facing a clone, Guy and Blue would have definitely lost interest in Diablo and left. Then he would have had more time to support Xion and the others. However, that act had to end now. My friend, you don't understand that you can't defeat a primordial demon with just disintegration, right? A trick like that can't be called a trump card. Seriously, disintegration is very strong. Both Diablo and Guy understand that if they were hit by it, they might die. However, that wasn't the case of being directly hit, because primordial demons were very skilled and experienced. They definitely wouldn't let themselves be directly hit by such attacks. So when Diablo considered this as a trump card, Guy realized that he was acting. At this moment, Guy was genuinely curious. Why had Diablo, who had remained so passive for thousands of years, suddenly chosen to evolve? He also questioned whether Diablo had joined forces with the other three primordial demons, who were constantly competing with and suppressing each other's growth. Diablo, with his usual composed demeanor, dismissed the idea. He had nothing to do with those three. Then, shifting the conversation, he posed a question to Guy. Tell me, is there anyone in this world stronger than us? It was the same question he had once asked Testarossa, a common inquiry among primordial demons. Naturally, Guy showed no particular reaction and gave the expected answer. No? Even the true dragons, Veldora, Milim's father, and the legendary Star King dragon Veldnava, were not considered threats. They were more akin to natural disasters than actual enemies. Diablo nodded in agreement. If that was the case, then any further evolution would only make battles one-sided and boring. That was precisely why he had refused to evolve for so many millennia. Guy, though unwilling to admit it, understood this sentiment. Fighting someone vastly weaker than oneself was dull and unchallenging. In his own way, Diablo was a battle purist, and this eccentric perspective resonated with Guy. Then, as if reaching an obvious conclusion, Guy remarked, I suppose it's because of Remuru that you decided to evolve. Diablo's smile widened. Indeed, Rimuru-sama's growth is beyond astonishing. What he has accomplished is worthy of my own evolution. Moreover, Rimuru-sama is incredibly charming, possessing a noble soul filled with wisdom, kindness, and... Alright, that's enough. Guy cut him off, rubbing his temples in frustration. Diablo blinked innocently. Enough? But I was just getting started on the grand adventures of Rimuru-sama. The people around him are also evolving at an unprecedented pace, and being in such an environment inspired me to... Oh, how wonderful. Guy interrupted again, this time sighing heavily. Despite his exasperation, he attempted to process Diablo's words. Diablo elaborated, explaining that in an environment where power and progress advance rapidly, limiting himself would have been foolish. To avoid stagnation, he had finally removed the restraints he had placed on his own evolution. Guy finally understood. However, the conversation then took a more serious turn. I've heard Remuru recently took control over the Western nations, Guy said with a mischievous grin. Unfortunately, my subordinates are about to turn that whole region into chaos. For Guy, tormenting humanity was nothing more than an amusing pastime. But for Remuru, who sought peaceful relations with humans, it was a significant issue. In his eyes, Diablo was someone who could once be on par with him. Therefore, this demon lord did not like Diablo acknowledging someone as his master. And since provoking Diablo directly wasn't wise, Guy decided to stir up trouble for Remuru instead, knowing it would inevitably cause problems for Diablo as well. With the Razul no longer guarding the northern frontier, the western nations will soon become a lawless wasteland, Guy continued. I doubt even Remuru or you can do anything about it. However, Diablo only chuckled. You truly underestimate Rimuru-sama. Do you think he has not anticipated this? Everything has already been arranged. Rimuru-sama's brilliance allows him to perceive and prepare for all possible outcomes. Guy raised an eyebrow. He had expected Diablo to be at least slightly unsettled, but instead the demon was completely unfazed. If anything, he seemed to revel in the conversation, taking every opportunity to praise Remuru. Ha! This Remuru really does seem interesting. Perhaps he's even exceeded my expectations. Diablo, grinning, replied without hesitation. But of course, that is only natural for Rimuru-sama. Guy sighed, realizing that Diablo's unwavering devotion was as strong as ever. If Remuru had been present to hear this conversation, he would have likely been speechless, questioning what on earth Diablo was doing in his absence. Meanwhile, Rain, who had been listening, bit her lip in frustration. To her, it was a waste that someone as powerful as Diablo had pledged loyalty to another. Yet the situation was becoming increasingly interesting, and with that, the video came to an end. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the next episode, and I'll see you all soon.